The desert night was crueler than the day. By day, the sun baked the land until the sand itself felt alive with heat. By night, the cold crept in like a thief, sharp and biting, stripping warmth from the bones. Nayeli felt both extremes as she lay bound to the weathered stake, her wrists rubbed raw by the coarse rope, her ankles fixed so tightly she could barely move her toes. She had been left there, deliberately, as prey. Not for scavengers alone, but for the wolves that roamed the arid plains when the moon was high. Her captors had laughed as they bound her. They were men from a rival band, merciless raiders who despised her people and relished cruelty for its own sake. One of them had grinned wide, his teeth flashing white against his bearded face, and told her in a language she barely understood, "The wolves will eat what's left of you by dawn." Then they rode away, leaving her to the stillness, to the circling shadows that already stirred at the edge of her vision. Nayeli was no stranger to fear. She had seen battles, had lost kin to the constant wars between tribes and to the endless push of white settlers. But this was a different kind of fear, slow, drawn out, meant to break her spirit before her body was taken. Every heartbeat echoed in her ears, faster when she heard the brush rustle, slower when silence returned, as if the desert itself was listening. The moon rose pale and high above, casting silver light across the plain. That light caught in her dark eyes, reflecting her quiet fury. She would not scream. Screaming would give her enemies victory. They wanted her terror to echo across the night like a song of defeat. Instead, she clenched her jaw, steadied her breath, and lifted her chin against the cold air. If death was to come, she would meet it with dignity. But deep within, under that defiance, the truth burned. She wanted to live. She thought of her mother's voice, the warmth of the campfires, the laughter of children chasing each other between the lodges. She thought of her younger brother, barely old enough to hunt, who still clung to her when nightmares came. If she died here, if the wolves tore her flesh from bone, who would protect him? That thought alone was enough to keep her, chest rising, enough to fuel the silent prayers she whispered into the dark. A howl shattered the quiet, long, mournful, and too close. The answering cry came from another direction, and then another, weaving a chilling harmony that seemed to tighten the ropes around her wrists. The wolves were gathering. Her eyes scanned the shadows. She caught the flicker of movement, low, deliberate, ears pricked, eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. They were watching her, testing her fear. Nayeli's throat tightened. She pulled at her bonds, the rope biting deeper into her flesh, but the knots held fast. The more she struggled, the more hopeless it seemed. Yet she remembered the stories. Told by the elders, wolves respected strength, despised weakness. If she surrendered to panic, they would sense it. So she forced her trembling legs to stillness, kept her gaze steady, and whispered to herself in her people's tongue, "I will not give them the sound of fear." The night stretched on, each minute heavy as an hour. The wolves crept closer, their eyes glowing brighter, their paws silent against the dust. Nayeli pressed her back against the stake and breathed deeply, trying to summon courage from the earth itself. If this was the end, she swore it would not be forgotten. What she did not yet know was that another set of eyes watched the same scene from the distance, eyes not belonging to wolves, but to a weary cowboy passing through the desert on his way to nowhere. The desert had a silence unlike any other place, a silence that weighed down on the ears until even the sound of one's own heartbeat seemed loud. Nayeli felt that silence pressing on her chest, broken only by the occasional rustle of brush or the faint scuff of paws circling her prison. The wolves did not rush. They never did. They were hunters of patience, masters of waiting until their prey lost the will to fight. Her breath misted faintly in the chill air. Every inhalation stung her throat, every exhale seemed to carry her, life away in little clouds of white. She kept her eyes fixed forward, though she longed to look behind her, to see if the shadows there shifted with the movement of wolves. But she would not give them the satisfaction. If they came, they would come head on, and she would face them as her people faced storms, unbowed even when powerless. Still, her body betrayed her. Her wrists ached from the ropes, her arms numb from being stretched too long above her head. A dull throb pulsed in her shoulders and spread down her back, a pain that deepened with every passing moment. She shifted slightly to ease it, and the wolves noticed. Their ears flicked. A low growl rumbled through the night. They knew she lived. They knew she struggled. Her thoughts turned dark. This could not be the way of her death, strung up like a slaughtered deer, abandoned for the scavengers. She thought of the warriors of her people, who died with bow in hand, who met their enemies with a war cry. She thought of the women who endured hardship, who carried whole families on their backs when hunger stalked the tribe. Why not me? She thought bitterly. Why must my end be this shameful? And yet, beneath the despair, a flicker of something else stirred. She remembered her grandmother's words, spoken long ago beside a fire. The Creator does not abandon those who still fight to breathe. Nayeli clung to that, even as her chest tightened with fear. The wolves drew closer. One slinked from the brush, a lean shadow with eyes that burned like embers. Its muzzle lowered, teeth glinting faintly. It padded closer, circling her slowly, its tail held high, a signal of dominance. The others lingered just beyond sight, waiting for their leader's move. Nayeli's pulse thundered in her ears. She wanted to scream, to lash out, to tear free of the ropes with sheer fury. Instead, she pressed her lips together and forced stillness into her trembling frame. She whispered to the wolf under her breath, voice steady despite the terror clawing inside her. If you come quickly. I will not give you fear. The wolf paused, head tilting, ears twitching at the sound of her voice. For a long, tense moment, the desert seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a low growl, the creature backed away, returning to the circle of shadows. Nayeli sagged against the stake, relief and dread crashing together. They were not ready yet. They were waiting. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the cold night wash over her. She imagined herself free, running through the mesquite brush, her moccasins silent against the sand. She imagined the stars above as guardians, the moon as a watchful spirit. If she could not break the ropes, perhaps she could keep her spirit unbroken, but desperation gnawed at her resolve. Her lips cracked with thirst, her arms burned with agony, and the wolves still waited. How long could she hold on? How long before her mind betrayed her courage, before her voice finally cracked into the scream her captors wanted? It was then, just as the shadows shifted again and the wolves' low growls thickened, that a distant sound reached her ears. Faint at first, then clearer. The slow, steady clop of hooves against the hard pan earth. Nayeli's eyes snapped open. She lifted her head, straining against the ropes, heart pounding with new urgency. Someone was out there in the night, someone human. For the first time since being abandoned, hope struck like lightning in her chest. But hope was dangerous too. Whoever came might be no friend. The rider had been on the trail since dawn, and the desert had given him nothing but dust and silence. Caleb Harding wasn't a man who sought company. He'd left behind enough memories and enough regrets to keep him in the saddle alone for months at a time. His only companion was the big sorrel gelding beneath him, a tough animal with the kind of patience only a cowboy's life could breed. The night was settling in hard. Stars pricked the velvet sky, sharp and endless, and the moon spread a pale wash across the landscape. Caleb tugged the brim of his hat lower against the chill. He had no destination, only the habit of riding away from places where he'd overstayed his welcome. He was drifting north, maybe toward the mountains, maybe toward nowhere in particular. Men like him didn't often need reasons, but something felt wrong tonight. The desert wasn't quiet in the usual way. The silence was too thick, too expectant. Even his horse felt it. The animal's ears twitched, its gait hesitated as though catching scents Caleb couldn't. He reined in and listened. That was when he heard it, the haunting call of a wolf. One howl, long and low, rising and falling with a sound that prickled the skin. Then another answered, sharper, closer. Caleb frowned. Wolves weren't strangers out here, but they usually gave men wide berth. Something was drawing them together, holding their attention. He nudged his horse forward, slow and cautious, following the sound across the scrub and mesquite. As he rode, fragments of his past stirred in the back of his mind. He remembered the war years, the hunger of packs that came too close to camps, how the soldiers used to fire into the dark just to keep their horses from bolting. Wolves didn't gather unless there was reason, food, blood, weakness. Whatever lay ahead, it wasn't natural. The hoofbeats carried him closer to the source, and soon he saw it, a faint flicker in the distance. At first, he thought it might be campfire embers, but it didn't grow or waver like flame. Instead, it caught the moonlight in a way that made him pull his horse up short. He narrowed his eyes. Something was out there in the open plain, standing against the pale light. The wind shifted. Caleb caught the unmistakable scent of animals, musk, fur, the sharp tang of predators near. His horse pawed the ground nervously, snorting, eager to turn away. Caleb laid a hand on the gelding's neck, steadying it. "Easy, boy," he murmured, his voice low and even. Then he saw movement. Small shapes, low to the ground, weaving like shadows across the earth. Wolves. At least half a dozen of them, maybe more, circling something at the center. Caleb's jaw tightened. He reached for the rifle slung across his saddle horn. Not because he was ready to fire, but because instinct told him to be prepared. Wolves were dangerous, but they weren't usually this bold. If they had gathered like this, it meant they had something cornered. As he watched, the something shifted, and the truth hit him like a hammer. It wasn't an animal. It was a person, bound upright against a stake. For a moment, Caleb thought his tired eyes deceived him. But the shape was clear, unmistakable. A woman, his gut twisted. Whoever had left her like that had meant for her to die, and slow. The wolves circled closer, their glowing eyes fixed on her. Caleb saw the faint tilt of her head, the way she held herself despite the ropes. She wasn't screaming, wasn't begging. She was waiting. The cowboy's hand tightened on his rifle. He could ride on, leave her to whatever fate had chosen her. But something in that still, defiant figure struck him deep, deeper than he cared to admit. Caleb spat into the dirt and muttered to himself, "Damn fool or not, I ain't riding past this." He urged his horse forward into the circle of danger. The gelding's hooves thudded softly against the packed earth as Caleb urged him forward, every step measured. The wolves turned their heads toward him, glowing eyes narrowing, bodies low and tense. A warning growl rumbled through the pack, carried on the dry night air. Caleb shifted his rifle across his saddle horn, keeping the barrel pointed skyward but ready. He stopped about 30 yards away, far enough that the wolves wouldn't lunge yet, close enough to see the figure at the center of their circle. The moonlight fell across her like a spotlight, and the sight made Caleb's stomach knot. She was young, though weariness shadowed her face, giving her an ageless strength. Long black hair tumbled in loose strands over her shoulders, whipped by the night wind. Her wrists were bound cruelly above her head to the stake, the rope digging deep into her skin. He could see where the blood had dried in ragged streaks. Her ankles were lashed tight to keep her still. But it wasn't the bindings that held him. It was her eyes. Even from that distance, they were alive, dark and sharp, catching the moon like polished obsidian. She didn't flinch when she noticed. Him, she didn't cry out. Instead, she fixed him with a gaze that was equal parts defiance and plea, as though daring him to turn away, but silently begging him not to. Caleb felt the weight of that stare settle in his chest. He'd seen men break under fear, seen them, hollowed out by despair. But this woman, whoever she was, carried herself like someone who refused to give her enemies the satisfaction of weakness. It was the kind of strength that stirred something in him, a reminder of battles he'd fought, just to keep moving when the world gave him no reason to. One of the wolves edged closer to her, its paws crunching the dust, head lowered, teeth flashing. She didn't move, only tightened her jaw and lifted her chin, as though daring it to strike. Caleb's horse shifted nervously, ears flat against its head. He steadied the animal with a firm hand and spoke softly, "Hold, boy. Easy." Then, he raised his rifle. The crack of the shot shattered the night. The bullet buried itself in the dirt a foot from the lead wolf's nose, spraying sand and grit. The pack yelped in alarm, scattering backward a few paces, but they didn't flee altogether. Their hunger was too strong. They lingered at the edges of the circle, pacing, their growls deeper, angrier. Caleb lowered the rifle just long enough to call out. His voice carried steady across the plain, firm but not unkind. "Hold on, miss. I'll get you out." The woman didn't answer. She only blinked slowly, her gaze fixed on him, as if weighing the truth of his words. Then faintly, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. That small gesture struck him harder than a shout would have. She trusted him, or at least she was willing to. The wolves regrouped, shadows shifting as they began to circle again, bolder this time. Caleb cursed under his breath. He couldn't waste shots firing warnings. He had only so many bullets and he might need everyone. But he had no choice. If he rode away, he would hear her silence in his head for the rest of his days. He adjusted his grip on the rifle, eyes narrowing. The wolves weren't going to wait much longer, and neither could he. For the first time, Caleb looked directly into the Apache woman's eyes and gave her a firm nod of his own, as if sealing a pact neither of them had spoken aloud. Then he kicked, his horse forward into the danger, the rifle rising once more. The crack of the rifle had bought them seconds, nothing more. The wolves had scattered at first, but hunger was a master that could not be denied. One by one, they slunk back into the moonlight, their eyes burning brighter, their paws silent, against the dirt. The desert air quivered with the low, unified growls of a pack that had decided this fight would be theirs. Caleb knew the look in their movements, the cautious weaving, the tightening circle, the deliberate way their leader stalked at the front, tail stiff, ears flat. Wolves were clever. They didn't lunge all at once. They tested, probed, looked for weakness. And right now, weakness stood bound to a stake in the middle of the plain. His gelding stamped nervously, sides quivering. The horse didn't want this fight, and Caleb couldn't blame it. He rubbed the animal's neck with one hand while keeping the rifle steady with the other. "Easy, boy," he muttered. "We got no choice but to stand." The nearest wolf crept forward, lips peeling back to reveal sharp teeth, white in the moonlight. It barked once, a short, harsh sound, and another darted in from the side. Caleb swung the rifle and fired. The report echoed across the land, the shot kicking up dirt inches from the lunging wolf's paws. The animal yelped and retreated, but not far. The others didn't scatter this time. They were learning. Caleb's jaw tightened. Ammunition was limited, and if he wasted it on warning shots, he'd run dry before they broke the circle. He slung the rifle back across the saddle and drew the Colt from his hip, the steel cold against his palm. The revolver felt right. Quicker, handier. He only hoped 6 bullets would be enough. The Apache woman watched from the stake, her body still, her eyes wide but steady. Not once had she screamed, not even when the wolves closed within 20 paces. Her strength in the face of terror made Caleb's chest tighten. She was no helpless creature, no fragile spirit waiting for rescue. She was a fighter shackled by rope, and she deserved better than to be abandoned to the teeth of beasts. A wolf darted in from the left, faster than a striking snake. Caleb's gun roared, the flash lighting the night. The wolf tumbled back with a yelp, but another rushed from the opposite side. Caleb's horse reared, hooves lashing the air. The cowboy steadied the animal with his knees, leaned low, and fired again. The second wolf spun into the dust. The pack faltered, growls rising in agitation. They circled tighter now, desperate, enraged. Caleb could hear their claws raking against the hardpan as they paced. His horse shifted, foam flecking its mouth, the whites of its eyes wide. Caleb whispered to it again, steady and calm, though. His own blood raced with fire. One of the larger wolves leapt suddenly, teeth snapping for the horse's flank. Caleb twisted, shot it midair, and the beast crumpled, rolling lifeless to the dirt. The gelding screamed, a shrill sound, but stood its ground. The remaining wolves snarled, but their hesitation grew. They were not used to prey that fought back. With thunder and fire. Still, hunger drove them, and Caleb knew they would not leave unless driven hard. He risked a glance toward the woman. Moonlight painted her face in pale silver, her chest rising and falling with sharp breaths, and yet her chin was still lifted, her eyes locked on him with something fierce, something that felt like trust. Caleb set his jaw. He wasn't just fighting for her life now. He was fighting for the promise in her gaze, the unspoken pact they had made when their eyes first met. As the wolves bunched together for another rush, Caleb thumbed back the hammer of his Colt and muttered to himself, "Come, on then, let's finish this." The pack broke from hesitation into fury. With a chorus of snarls, 3 wolves lunged at once, fanning from different angles, one for the horse's legs, one for Caleb's stirrup, and one straight for his throat. Caleb had no more time to think. His revolver barked once, then again, the gunfire blasting holes in the silence. The first wolf tumbled in a spray of dust, its momentum carrying it past the horse's hooves. The second veered off, singed by the bullet that nicked the ground inches from its muzzle. The third, big, heavy, and relentless, leapt high. Caleb twisted in the saddle and slammed the barrel of his Colt into the beast's skull midair. The wolf hit the dirt with a stunned yelp, snapping blindly before scrambling away. His horse was near panic, rearing, foam flying from its mouth. Caleb gritted his teeth, pressing his knees hard against the gelding's sides, whispering rough, steady words. "Hold steady, boy, hold steady." He needed the horse beneath him. Without it, he'd be torn down in an instant. The wolves regrouped, circling tighter, their growls vibrating through the ground. They were thinning now, 4 left, maybe 5, but those that remained were the hungriest, the most determined. Their leader, a gray brute with scars across its muzzle, paced at the front, lips curled in a permanent snarl. Its yellow eyes locked on Caleb with a hatred that felt almost human. Caleb holstered the smoking Colt and swung his rifle back up. He leveled it at the scarred wolf, exhaled slow, and squeezed. The shot cracked, and the brute dropped where it stood, legs folding like sticks. For a heartbeat, silence. Then the pack erupted. 2 wolves came from the side. Caleb's gelding lashed out, hooves smashing into one with a sickening crunch. The second clamped its teeth on the horse's flank, and the animal screamed, bucking wildly. Caleb nearly lost the rifle, hanging on by sheer grit. He twisted and fired point-blank into the beast's side. It yelped and fell away, blood streaking the sand. The others wavered now, circling but uncertain. Hunger warred with fear. Their leader was gone. Half their number lay dead or dying, and the man on horseback was no easy prey. Still, they lingered, unwilling to give up their prize, the bound woman they had been promised by fate itself. Caleb's chest heaved with ragged breaths. Sweat stung his eyes, mixing with the dust and gunpowder. He reloaded with shaking hands, cartridges slipping. Once before he forced them home. He wasn't finished. He couldn't be, not with her still lashed to that stake. He stole a glance at her. She hadn't moved, though he could see the tremble in her body, the way her breath came fast. Yet her eyes, they were steady, locked on him with a fire that cut through the fear. It was as if she lent him her strength, her silent demand, that he not falter. Caleb spat into the dirt, raised his rifle, and set his jaw. "You ain't getting her," he muttered, voice low and hard. The wolves lunged again, their last desperate gamble. Caleb fired, the shot slamming one down mid-stride. His horse reared and struck, throwing another to the ground. The final two circled, snarling, then slunk back into the brush, tails low, beaten by fire and iron. Silence fell, broken only by the ragged breaths of horse and man. Caleb sat tall in the saddle, chest heaving, rifle still at the ready, eyes sweeping the shadows. The desert was empty now, the threat scattered. At last he lowered the gun. His gaze shifted to the woman still bound against the stake, her eyes wide, her body rigid with exhaustion. She was alive. He had held the line. Caleb blew out a breath heavy with relief and muttered, "Now, let's get you free." Caleb swung down from the saddle, boots crunching against the hardpan. His legs felt heavy, every muscle trembling from the strain of holding the fight. His rifle stayed in his hand, the barrel sweeping the shadows in case one of the beaten wolves found its courage again. The gelding sidestepped nervously, ears pinned, blood streaking its flank from the bite. Caleb gave the animal a quick pat on the neck. "You held, boy, you held." Then he turned to her. Up close, the woman's condition struck him hard. Her wrists were swollen, rope biting into raw flesh. Dust clung to her skin, and her lips were cracked with thirst. Yet her eyes, those dark, unyielding eyes, followed his every move, sharp as a blade. "I'll get you down," he said, his voice low but firm, as though speaking too loud might shatter the thin hold she had on her strength. He slung the rifle across his back, pulled a hunting knife from his belt, and stepped closer. The wolves' growls had faded into the distance, but their presence lingered in the air. Caleb didn't trust them gone for good. Every second counted. He raised the knife to the rope, binding her wrists. She flinched slightly, not from fear of him, but from the sudden nearness of the blade. Caleb slowed his movement, steadying his hand. "Easy, just the ropes." The first cut sliced through a strand, and the tension eased. Blood rushed back into her arms, making her gasp softly, her body sagging forward. Caleb caught her shoulder, with his free hand steadying her. Her skin burned with fevered warmth beneath the cold night air. "You're all right," he murmured. "One more and you're free." But before he could finish, the brush behind them rustled. Caleb's instincts screamed. He shoved himself in front of her, knife ready. A low growl split the night. One wolf had returned. The scarred brute he'd thought dead was dragging itself back into the circle, limping, eyes blazing with hatred. Caleb's rifle was too far. The Colt was holstered. All he had was the knife. The wolf lunged. Caleb met it halfway, steel flashing in the moonlight. The impact drove him back, claws raking across his sleeve. He grunted, slashing upward. The blade bit deep, and the wolf yelped, twisting in pain. Still, it snapped, teeth clamping against his forearm. A cry rang out, not from Caleb, but from the woman. Her legs were still bound, but her arms now hung loose. With sudden strength, she yanked one hand free of the half-cut rope and grabbed the heavy stake she was tied to. She swung it with both hands, striking the wolf across the skull. The beast released Caleb with a snarl, staggering sideways. Caleb wasted no breath. He drove the knife forward once, twice, until the animal collapsed into the dust, silent at last. Breathing hard, he wiped the blade against his trousers and turned back to her. She was still clutching the stake, her chest heaving, her lips parted, as though she couldn't decide whether to curse him or thank him. "You fight," Caleb said, voice rough, almost admiring. He set to work on the last of the ropes, slicing through the knots at her ankles. When the bindings fell, she stumbled forward, nearly collapsing. Caleb caught her, steadying her with strong arms. For a moment they stood there, two strangers. In the moonlight, both marked by blood and dust, both alive by the narrowest margin. Her eyes lifted to his, fierce, even in exhaustion. She spoke at last, her voice hoarse but steady. "You did not leave." Caleb met her gaze, something unspoken, passing between them. "Wasn't about to." The desert wind howled through the silence that followed, carrying off the last scent of wolves. The last knot came loose with a snap, and the rope slid from her wrists and ankles like shed skin. For the first time in hours, maybe longer, Nayeli stood free. Her legs trembled, weak from blood loss and strain, but she refused to crumple. Pride alone kept her upright. She leaned against the stake, steadying herself, her chest heaving as she drew in the night air with something close to reverence. Caleb stepped back a pace, giving her space. He slid the knife back into its sheath, keeping his movements slow, non-threatening. He knew enough to understand she wasn't some fragile creature needing coddling. She was a woman wronged, humiliated, and her dignity mattered more than his gratitude for survival. "You're free now," he said quietly, tipping his hat back from his brow. Nayeli lifted her gaze to him. Her dark eyes glistened in the moonlight, not with tears, but with fire. She touched her raw wrists, then raised her chin. "You are not of my people," she said, her voice hoarse, accented but steady. "No," Caleb admitted, "but I reckon that don't matter tonight." A silence stretched between them, filled with all the things neither spoke aloud. He had killed for her. She had struck to save him. The ground between them was blood-soaked and heavy with the scent of wolves. Yet in that grim place, a fragile thread of trust was knotted. Nayeli swayed, her strength faltering. Caleb stepped forward instinctively, one hand hovering at her elbow. "Easy. Don't push too hard yet." She stiffened at his nearness, her pride bristling. But her body betrayed her. Her knees buckled. Caleb caught her before she hit the dirt, cradling her weight against his chest. She was light, but not frail. Her body carried the wiry resilience of someone who had lived through hardship. "Put me down," she rasped, though her hands clutched faintly at his shirt, as if torn. "Between refusal and need, I will, soon as I know you can stand." His voice carried no mockery, only quiet resolve. He lowered her gently onto a flat stone where she could rest without collapsing into the dust. Nayeli sat there, breathing hard, the pale silver of moonlight painting her features. She looked at the cowboy, the stranger with a rifle and a stubborn sense of duty, and her eyes softened just a fraction. "Why?" she asked at last. "Why stop for me?" Caleb crouched, his rifle across his knees, scanning the shadows even as he answered. "Because leaving you tied there would have made me less of a man than the wolves." He paused, then added with a wry twist of his mouth, "And I've been trying to keep what little of a man I got left." Her lips curved. Not quite a smile, but not disdain either. "My enemies left me for beasts. You are not like them." "No," Caleb said, shaking his head. "Not like them." Another silence fell, but it was different this time. Not hostile, not heavy. More like a truce. Nayeli leaned her head back against the stake, eyes closing briefly, as though letting the night breeze cool her fevered skin. Caleb studied her, then stood and moved to his horse. He tore a strip from his own canteen, wetting the cloth, and returned to press it into her hands. "Here, wash the blood from your wrists. You'll need strength." She took it without a word, but her fingers brushed his in the exchange, deliberate, testing. Their eyes met again, and in that small touch, the bond between them deepened. Not gratitude, not yet trust, but recognition. For the first time since the cruel binding, Nayeli no longer felt abandoned, and for the first time in a long while, Caleb no longer felt alone. The desert night settled again, quieter now that the wolves had slunk into the shadows. Only the wind moved across the plain, stirring the dust and carrying the faint smell of blood. Caleb sat a few feet away from her, his rifle resting across, his knees, eyes still scanning the dark. He knew predators sometimes lingered, circling back once a man let his guard down. Nayeli sat straighter, the cool rag pressed against her swollen wrists. Each sting of the rope burn reminded her she was alive. She studied the cowboy in silence, her mind turning over the strangeness of him. He was not of her people. His clothes smelled of leather and sweat. His hat shadowed a face roughened by sun and hard miles. He was dangerous. That much was clear. But danger had saved her. At last, she spoke. Her voice was low but strong. "You fight like one who has nothing left to lose." Caleb's mouth twitched at the corner. "Might be you're right." He didn't look at her when he said it. His gaze stayed fixed on the horizon, watchful. Nayeli tilted her head. "Then why fight for me?" Caleb's hand brushed across the rifle stock, his thumb tracing the worn grooves. "Because I've seen too many left behind. Soldiers, settlers, even my own kin once. Didn't sit right then, wouldn't sit right now." Her eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "So you carry ghosts with you?" "Plenty," he admitted. His voice was flat, not defensive, as though ghosts were just part of his saddle gear, carried without complaint. A silence passed, filled with the sigh of wind over stone. Then Nayeli set the rag aside and drew a breath. "My name is Nayeli," she said at last, her people's word for "I am loved." To speak it aloud here, in the place her enemies had left her for dead, was both defiance and declaration. Caleb turned his head toward her, eyes shadowed under the brim of his hat. "Nayeli," he repeated, slow, careful, as though testing the weight of it. "Name suits you." She studied him in return. "And you?" Caleb Harding. He tipped his hat briefly as though acknowledging an unspoken ritual. "Just a drifter now." Her gaze lingered on him, measuring. "A drifter who stops for strangers tied to stakes." "Reckon so," Caleb said, and a faint humor crept into his voice. "Though I can't say it's a habit I'm keen to keep." For the first time, the faintest ghost of a smile touched her lips. It was gone in a heartbeat, swallowed by fatigue, but Caleb caught it, and something eased in his chest. He reached into his saddlebag and drew out a strip of jerky, offering it across the space between them. "Ain't much, but it'll keep you on your feet." Nayeli hesitated, pride warring with hunger, then took it. Her fingers brushed his again, deliberate this time. She chewed slowly, the salt sharp on her tongue, and whispered, "My enemies thought I would die without witness, yet you came." Caleb met her gaze. "Don't know what brought me down this trail tonight. Maybe luck. Maybe the Lord. Maybe just a horse too stubborn to quit. But I reckon it don't matter now." She swallowed, then nodded once, solemn. "No, it matters." For a long moment they sat together in silence, not captor and captive, not rescuer and rescued, but two souls, adrift in the desert, bound by what they had endured. The wolves were gone, But the bond between them had been forged in their teeth and their howls. And though the night was not yet done, neither felt entirely alone. The first blush of dawn touched the horizon, pale streaks of rose and gold spreading over the dark desert. The long night had ended, though its shadows clung to both of them. Caleb tightened the cinch on his gelding, patting the animal's sweat-damp neck. The horse had bled from its flank but still stood steady, a testament to grit. Nayeli rose slowly, her legs stiff, her wrists raw and swollen. Each step was a test of will. Caleb moved toward her, offering an arm without words. For a moment she hesitated, pride flaring, but then her fingers curled around his sleeve. He helped her mount, lifting her with care, as though she were both fragile and unbreakable all at once. She settled onto the saddle, the horse shifting beneath her weight. Caleb swung up behind, reins in hand, rifle strapped once more across his back. The sun's rim peaked above the far ridges, casting their shadows long across the plain. For miles, they rode in silence. The desert was waking, the cry of a hawk. Overhead, the faint stir of wind through dry brush, the memory of wolves fading like a nightmare chased away by light. Yet the bond of the night still pulsed between them, unspoken but strong. At last, Nayeli spoke, her voice husky but steady. They thought no one would see me die. They thought the earth would eat my bones, and my spirit would wander alone. Caleb glanced at her profile, sharp against the dawn glow. They were wrong. She turned her head slightly, meeting his gaze. Yes, because you came. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Words often made less sense to him than actions, and his actions tonight were all the truth he had to give. They crested a rise, and the world opened before them. Miles of open. Country, dotted with mesquite and stone. Smoke from some distant campfire curled faintly against the sky. Caleb saw it first, narrowed his eyes. Too far to tell whose camp it was. Apache, settlers, or raiders. Trouble or salvation. He nudged, the horse down the slope, careful, thoughtful. Nayeli followed his gaze and said softly, My people are not far, but so are my enemies. That's so, Caleb muttered. He adjusted his grip on the reins, the rifle knocking gently against his shoulder. He wasn't sure yet where this road would carry them, whether toward safety or straight into another fight. But he knew one thing for certain. He wouldn't leave her, not now. The sun climbed higher, washing the desert in gold. For the first time since her cruel binding, Nayeli's shoulders eased. She let the wind run through her hair, the ropes gone, her spirit unbroken. Caleb felt the shift beside him, subtle but real, like the air after a storm. As the horizon stretched endless ahead, he spoke low, almost to himself. Whatever comes next, we ride it together. Nayeli turned her head, studying him, then gave a single slow nod. Not submission, not dependence, agreement. The horse's hooves struck a steady rhythm, carrying them into the wide, waiting dawn. Two strangers bound by blood, dust, and the silent vow of one night's survival. Neither knew where the trail would end, but for now they rode forward, side by side against whatever came.